want you to think about what the word neighbor actually means. It comes from the Old English, nea, meaning near, gebur, meaning dweller, a near dweller, someone who lives close to you, someone who shares your world. Thoughtful. In a city, your neighbor is the person whose music bleeds through the wall. You might know their name, you might not. It doesn't matter much either way. There are other people on the floor, other floors in the building, other buildings on the street. You are never truly alone with just them. But out in the country, on a dirt road, behind a tree line, at the end of a long driveway with nothing between you and the horizon, your neighbor is something different. They are the only other human soul for miles. If something is wrong with them, there is no buffer, no escape hatch, no one to call who will arrive quickly enough to matter. Tonight, I have 3 stories from people who learned that lesson the hard way. 3 rural properties, 3 neighbors, 3 situations that started small, quiet, and dismissible, and became something that not one of these people has recovered from. One of these stories doesn't have an ending yet, because the person living it is still there, still next door to what I'm about to describe. She sent me an update 4 days ago. I'll share it at the end. Let's begin with Owen, and the man who watched him from the fence. Story 1. The Man at the Fence. Owen Marsh was 47 years old when he made the best decision of his life. That's what he called it at the time. The best decision of his life. He'd spent 30 years in commercial construction. 30 years of early mornings, job sites, city traffic, subcontractors who didn't show up, clients who changed their minds, and the particular exhaustion that comes from building things for other people while your own life stays exactly the same size. He had a good marriage, 2 grown kids, and a body that had started sending him warning signals in the form of blood pressure numbers his doctor didn't like. So he and his wife, Carol, cashed out of their suburban house in Columbus, Ohio, sold his share in the contracting business to his partner, and bought 12 acres of land in Ravalli County, Montana. Farmhouse, creek, mountains visible from the kitchen window. The kind of property that looks like a painting and costs less than a city condo because it's 2 hours from anything. Chuckles. Owen told me, I had worked my whole life for silence and I finally bought some. He was right about the silence. He was wrong about what was already living inside it. Their nearest neighbor was a man named Harlan Creed. 64 years old, sole occupant of the 40 acres directly to their north, separated from Owen's property by a post and rail fence that ran along the edge of the tree line. Harlan had been on that land for 21 years. He had no family that anyone in the area could identify. He drove into town once a month for supplies and spoke to no one beyond what the transaction required. When Owen met him the first week, Harlan came down the fence line to introduce himself, hand extended, face unreadable. He said exactly 8 words. Monotone. Good fences make good neighbors. Welcome to the valley. Then he turned and walked back to his property without waiting for a response. Carol watched from the porch. When Harlan was gone, she came down and stood next to Owen and said quietly, concerned, "Something is off with him." Owen put his arm around her and said, reassuring, "He's just a private man. That's how people are out here." He has replayed that moment many times since. The moment he talked his wife out of her instincts. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after they moved in. Owen was up at 5:20 a.m., which was his habit, standing at the kitchen window with a coffee mug watching the light come up over the eastern ridge. The kitchen window faced north across the field toward the fence line, and the tree line beyond it. Harlan was standing at the fence. He was standing at the section of fence directly opposite Owen's house, about 200 yards across the field. Completely still. Facing the house, hands at his sides. Owen watched him for several minutes. Harlan didn't move. No tools. No dog, no apparent purpose. Owen told himself the man was checking his fence posts, or watching the sunrise, or just taking a morning walk that happened to stop at this particular spot. He told himself a lot of things in the weeks that followed, because Harlan was there the next morning, and the morning after that. And every morning that first week, between 5:15 and 6 a.m., Owen would come downstairs and look out the kitchen window, and Harlan would be standing at the fence facing the house. Still, patient, like something that had nowhere else to be. By the end of week 2, Owen had stopped mentioning it to Carol. He walked up to the fence on a Wednesday morning in the 4th week. He crossed the 200 yards of field with the sun still low and cold behind him, and Harlan watched him come the entire way. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't acknowledge Owen's approach. He simply watched, the way you watch something you've been expecting. Owen said good morning. He asked if everything was all right. Harlan looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were pale. That particular pale gray that seems to have less color in it than normal eyes, like something had been diluted. He said, "I like to know what's on my land." Owen kept his voice level. "This is my land, Harlan. The fence is the boundary." Harlan nodded, slow, deliberate. Then he said 2 words that Owen has never been able to stop hearing. "For now," and walked away up the slope toward his property without looking back. Owen installed security cameras that weekend. 4 of them, covering the driveway, both sides of the house, and the fence line. He told Carol it was just good sense for a rural property. She agreed. He didn't tell her about the fence line conversation. The fence line camera triggered on its first night of operation, 2:17 a.m. Owen sat up in bed when his phone buzzed, opened the app, and watched the footage with his chest tightening with every second. Harlan was at the fence, standing in the dark in the exact same spot, facing the house. The night vision made his face a pale mask, his eyes 2 dim points of reflected light. He stood there for 31 minutes, motionless, and then walked back up the slope into the dark. Over the next 3 months, Owen documented 41 separate nighttime appearances. He kept a log, dates, times, duration. The shortest visit was 4 minutes. The longest was 2 hours and 17 minutes. 2 hours and 17 minutes of a man standing in the dark, facing a house where people were sleeping. Owen called the Ravalli County Sheriff's Department twice. The first deputy who came out spoke to Harlan and returned looking mildly uncomfortable. He told Owen that standing on your own property was not a criminal act. He suggested a higher fence. Owen asked him point blank, "Do you think this man is dangerous?" The deputy took just a fraction of a second too long to answer. Half a breath. The kind of pause a man makes when he already knows the answer and is deciding whether to say it. "I think you should keep your cameras running," he said, and got in his car. The climax of Owen's story happened on a Thursday afternoon in October. Owen was 20 minutes outside of town on a supply run when his phone rang. It was Carol. He knew before she spoke. He told me later that the sound of her breathing, just the sound of her trying to pull air in steadily, the specific way a person breathes when they are focusing every ounce of their will on not falling apart, told him everything. She said, "He's inside the fence, Owen. He's on our land. He's in the tree line, and he's looking at me, and I don't know how long he's been there." Carol had been in the garden on the south side of the property, hands in the soil, planting the winter bulbs she'd been putting off for weeks. She said she felt it before she saw it. A change in the quality of the air. The particular silence that falls when every bird in an area stops making noise at the same moment. She stood up slowly and turned around, and Harlan Creed was standing in the shadows of the tree line at the northern edge of their property, 12 feet inside their fence, watching her. He wasn't holding anything. He wasn't moving. He was just standing in the shadow where the tree line began, perfectly still, with that expression she had never been able to fully describe to Owen. Not threatening, not angry, not the face of a man who meant her harm. Something worse than any of those things. Patient, expectant. Like he had been waiting for this specific moment for a very long time, and was quietly satisfied that it had finally arrived. Carol stood up and faced him directly. She told me she didn't run because something in her understood that running would change the nature of what was happening. That right now, it was a standoff, and she needed to keep it that way. She said his name. She said Harlan in a voice she described as the steadiest she had ever produced in her life. He looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked back through the fence, through a gap she had never seen before. 3 rails removed and stacked neatly to one side, the opening exactly wide enough for a person, and disappeared into the trees. Owen was home in 18 minutes. He found the gap. He photographed it. He called the sheriff's department, and this time he did not ask politely. He told them a man had trespassed on his property and been within feet of his wife, and he needed a report filed immediately. A different deputy came, photographed the gap, told them they would speak to Harlan. 3 days later, Owen found a second gap on the opposite side of the property. Also neatly done, 3 rails removed, stacked to the side, the opening exactly wide enough for a person. It was on the south side of the fence, the side facing the garden where Carol had been kneeling. Harlan had made himself 2 doors. Denouement. They were gone within 3 weeks. Owen sold the property at a loss of $62,000. He didn't negotiate. He took the first offer and signed the paperwork, and they were in a rental apartment in Missoula before November. Before he left, Owen did something he still can't fully explain. He walked up to Harlan's property line and stood there until the old man came out onto his porch. They looked at each other across the distance. Then Owen called out, "Why? Why us?" Harlan stood on his porch for a long time. Then he said, "I've been waiting for the right people to come to that land for over 20 years. I thought you were them, but you're not patient enough." He shook his head once, like a teacher disappointed in a student, and went back inside. Pause. Owen and Carol never went back. The property sold again 4 months later to a couple from Portland. Owen found their names through the county records. He typed out a message to them 3 separate times. He deleted it each time. He told me, "What would I say that wouldn't sound insane? What warning is specific enough to be useful?" He checks the county records every few months. The Portland couple still own the property. He doesn't know if that means nothing has happened, or if it means they haven't left yet. Harlan Creed is still on his 40 acres, still there, still waiting for the right people. Owen lost $62,000 and his dream of a quiet life in Montana. He got out. But before I let you go tonight, I need you to sit with one question, because it is the question that connects all 3 stories in this series. Was Harlan Creed dangerous? On the surface, yes. A man who watches your house at 2 a.m. A man who cuts gaps in your fence. A man who stands in your tree line 15 feet from your wife without making a sound. But here is the other side of that question. Harlan had been on that land for 21 years. 21 years of watching families move in next door, watching them leave, waiting for the right ones. Right for what? What if Harlan wasn't the threat? What if Harlan was the only thing standing between every family on that land, and something that was already there when he arrived? In episode 2, you're going to meet a woman named Margot, a scientist, someone who didn't believe in any of this, until her neighbor told her something was living in the woods between their properties. Something that had been there for over 20 years. Something that was drawn to people who were alone. And until she heard it herself. Don't forget, hit the subscribe button. Episode 2 drops soon. And when you hear what Gerald told Margot about the thing in those woods, you're going to think about Harlan very differently. Keep the lights on.